6:40 here on a Wednesday morning. We usually have our Morning Cup of Joe segment with Sheriff Joe Lombardo on Wednesdays. He's running for governor, as you know. So now it's Mornings with Metro, and today we are joined by Undersheriff Christopher Darcy. Good to see you, sir. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the show.
And thank you for being here. Let's talk about one of the main issues we've been covering recently. A case over at Allegiant Stadium had his first big concert over the weekend. Show went pretty well, but afterwards there was an incident involving a couple of officers and a suspect that they were trying to arrest. The suspect got his hand on one of the officers' guns, opened fire. I get that the officers are going to be okay, but just kind of what's the latest on the case right now?
Yes, thank you so much for asking about our officers, too. It's very important. We appreciate the community support. So they're home resting. Obviously, one was struck by the bullet in the leg, and the other one was hit from some splashback from the round hitting the ground. Essentially, they took a suspect into custody for pushing a security officer. They had him in handcuffs and were escorting him into an elevator. The handcuffs were tight or not appropriately placed, so they were readjusting them, right, to make sure that the suspect was cuffed appropriately. And at that point, he was able to reach back around, stick his finger into the holster of the firearm, and a round discharge, striking the officer. So with something like that, obviously, we go back and we'll do a review, whether it was equipment, whether it's training, or whether it's a policy issue.
Well, and you know, yesterday at the press conference, Metro had mentioned that this was going to be reviewed, whether it's an equipment issue or a malfunction of some kind. But this is, I believe, the second time that there's been a case like this where a suspect has gotten their hand on a gun. There was the Amari Nicholson suspect,
Yes.
Terrell Rhodes, I believe, and that was in a different circumstance, but still was able to get a hand on their gun. Presumably there's training and things to try and prevent that from happening.
Correct.
Would that just not come through? What happened?
Yes. Well, they're two different incidents,
Sure.
and we'll look at each one separately and determine, like I said, whether it's a tactical issue or an equipment issue or a policy issue that we need to change. In the first case that you're referring to was in an interview room with two detectives where the gun was actually removed from the holster and a struggle ensued, and I'm happy to say that our officers didn't use deadly force or anything. They were able to get the firearm away from the suspect. And in this case, the gun never actually came out of the holster, so that the round discharged while the gun was inside the holster. So the two different set of circumstances, but it does merit us taking a very comprehensive review, like I said, on our training and our tactics and equipment.
So speaking of Allegiant and the big crowds we had in town for the 4th of July, there was a big relaunch, a big enforcement effort on the Las Vegas Strip downtown to try and make sure that any sort of crime was snuffed out before it got bad. Talk about those enforcement efforts and whether Metro considers they went well.
It did go well. I mean, it was a very, very busy weekend as we look back at all the different events that were going on, the concerts and the event at Allegiant Stadium, the electric EDC-type festival and everything that we had. It was a very, very busy weekend, and I anticipate that we'll probably continue to see that as we move forward, right?
Well, and especially when this strip started to reopen in the first place, remember there were a lot of fights and there was some gun violence on the strip, so I imagine it's a pretty big effort by Metro to try and make sure that doesn't come back.
Yes, and as we've talked about before, the Operation Persistent Pressure that we run down at Convention Center Area Command, really it's a partnership between all the security of all the different properties and all the different law enforcement agencies in this community really assist us in that. We couldn't do it alone. There's a lot of officers that we need out there, and I'm happy to say that we haven't had a shooting on the Strip in 3 months. So our efforts are paying off. We're still retrieving some guns from people on the Strip, but not nearly as many as we were several months ago. So that continual contact and pressure on the Strip with our partners is making a difference to keep Las Vegas safe.
Now, in addition, you mentioned partnerships. There's also a big partnership during the 4th to track down illegal fireworks use.
Yes.
That's not a new issue in Las Vegas or anywhere else for the 4th of July. This year was a little bit different. Talk about what Metro did with other law enforcement agencies and fire departments to keep an eye on those fireworks.
Yeah, we partner with the city and the county fire department, and we go out, and I think we responded to over 650.
Wow.
We got 650 calls. We responded to about 140 of them. We impounded over 1,700 pounds of fireworks, and I mean, we don't get them all, right? As we know, we live in the neighborhoods and we hear them, but we made a good effort this year to try to stop some of those fires that you had mentioned earlier in your newscast.
It's got to be hard to try and just find them. I mean, you see them in the sky, but trying to find where they are, I mean, it's got to be a needle in a haystack.
It is, and often when officers go down into a neighborhood street, they run into the house or they hide or they move. They're not generally standing outside all the time, but we can conduct an investigation and determine where it came from and issue appropriate citations.
Well, Under Sheriff Christopher Darcy, we appreciate you joining us this morning here from Mornings with Metro. If you have a question for Metro Police yourself, you can submit it on our website, of course. It's 8newsnow.com. You can find out if your question is answered every Wednesday.